Hey folks, welcome back to the shop. And boy, did you pick a good time to stop by. Today we have a homemade chopper. Hardtail, old school apes, old school tanks, old Evolution motor, open primary. So why is the bike here? Well, this was a home build and the guy's having trouble just finishing the line, just going across, finishing. And the problem is with the wiring. He can't figure out the wiring. And that seems to be a problem for a lot of people doing their own home builds. But really, guys, it's super simple. And so we're going to learn how to chopper wire a bike today. There's a lot of other things on this bike that need to be addressed for it to be roadworthy. You know, with building a home build, you can't just weld something and hop on it and go down the road. There are some things as we walk around it. Let me get you peepers in here and we'll walk around. You're going to see some things that are just a no-no to put on a bike or to do to a bike. So we're going to correct those. We're going to learn how to chopper wire a bike, as minimal wiring as we can, and we're going to have a whole lot of fun. So welcome back to Butler Customs Motorcycle Shop. What in the world? What? Put that back there. That's fine. Factory. So the story to this bike is that this was his father's bike. And his father, I believe, passed away. And he's been building on this bike. But there are some things that we need to address on this bike. We're going to walk around it and I'm going to show you some things. When it first come in, the rear wheel wouldn't even move, wouldn't even rotate. I had to actually undo the rotor for it to even spin the tire, and that's just because this rotor, as you can see, is in bad shape and not aligned with the rear brake caliper. Some other things, where do we start? I mean, I give the guy an A for effort, but an F in functionality. Headlights, I'm not sure how they're wired yet. They seem to be fine. Of course, we'll have to address the issue with this thing just not even being on. He's running no switches up here, which is old school, true to old school. He does have front brake caliper and the clutch and the throttle. All right, wiring for this, the speedometer does not work, so he's not running a mechanical line as of yet. So I'm not sure if he's just going to run with no speedometer or use his phone or what, but he didn't want to address that or run the cable to that. I don't know how anything is wired up, but it's in pretty rough shape. What you've got up down here is S&S. This choke, someone bent out, it sticks, it hits this breather bolt, no good. The exhaust is just hanging, it is not mounted, and the mounting holes don't line up, so we'll need to address that as well. It's terrible, guys, to let your headers just hang and with your exhaust and muffler just hang with nothing. This puts a lot of stress on the heads and the gaskets as well. He's running an Ultima digital electronic ignition, just a simple 3-wire ignition. We'll look at that and need to address that and get that wiring correctly. The seat is a homemade bracket kind of deal with this springs and bracket, but as you can see, it is setting on the battery, which is not a good idea. So we'll fix that as well. You can tell that this is homemade by the way that it is. The frame looks to be a good job on the frame. The wiring, however, this guy is pretty innovative to come up with this. just bent some tube, and then you know, use these clamps to hold it down, and then you got, you know, all these switches here that do different things. Same on the other side, but just wiring everywhere. When you stand up to move the bike, you hit these switches with your leg. If you have a riding doubles and you have a rear passenger and they got their foot here, you're hitting that. So this has got to go, and the one on the other side has to go as well. Just no good, and as you can see, I just broke it. So that wouldn't have lasted 2 miles down the road. Got to address that. He's running an open primary, and there's a big chunk of this gone. I don't know if that'll affect balance or not, but we'll have to see. A whole lot of slop in the shifter, and then the wiring is what we're going to focus on. So in this video, yes, we're going to get the bike road worthy. I'm not even sure, don't ask. We're going to get the bike road worthy and ready to go. I've got a box of parts that he sent me, but here's what I want to do. So if you get an old bike like this, say you pick it up on Marketplace, or got a buddy of a friend at work has a cousin that needs some money and is getting rid of his project bike. If you get a basket case in like this, where do you start? Well, the first thing is you want to make sure that you're getting the bike running. I do know customer says that this bike, the motor does run, transmission does shift. We don't have to do all the stuff to make sure the motor's fine. What we have to do though is to get the motor running. And so we need to figure out our wiring for that. And that's where you would start. If I had bought this bike like this, that's exactly where I'd start. I'd strip it all down and start doing my wiring first. Get my wiring ran with the frame, then start adding all the stuff that I wanted. If I wanted LED lights, if I wanted turn signals, if I wanted all this stuff, I would wire that in mind while I'm doing my wiring. But the first thing we'll start on is our wiring, and this is going to be fun. So look, as I've said, don't let wiring scare you, all right? Wiring, I think, is one of my favorite things to do because you have to plan it out. It's like a puzzle to put together, and this wire feeds this and makes this operate. And so when it's a completed job and it works well, it's a fun thing to do. So we're going to have some fun. Let's get into it. I'm going to strip this bike down to just the motor, transmission, and frame, of course the wheels on it, and then we're going to start building the wiring up. And so we're going to walk through everything that's needed, just the minimum, to make this bike run and road worthy. While I'm getting some tools out here, I just want to take a moment to say, hey, thank you guys so much for subscribing, and that really helps us out so much. I know subscriptions are free to you, but they really mean a lot to us as a channel to keep doing what we're doing, reaching more people, and one day finding that project bike and then giving it away to one of our customers. So thank you so much for that. If you haven't subscribed yet, please just click that button, and welcome to our family and hanging out here in the shop. Love all the comments. Love to respond to each and every comment. You guys have been very kind to me, and so thank you for being a part of what we're doing here. Just want to brag on you for a minute. I tell you guys, when you're dealing with homemade builds, you'll be surprised at the ingenuity people come up with to get stuff mounted. And so his spacers were too nuts. Hey, I've been known to do that myself. Not knocking that. But then there's a wood screw that is in this seat, which is a door hinge. Safety first, always. Eye protection. Yeah, that's a door hinge, a squeaky door hinge. They are these mechanical relays in here as well, which is old school, and I like these. The reason I like these mechanical relays is because if they get hot and stop working or malfunction, in about 10 minutes they'll reset. So unlike a fuse, if a fuse blows, it blows, and you have to have another fuse to go back in it, or stick your pocket knife in it, or stick a bubblegum wrapper in it or something, which defeats the purpose of it. Well, these just reset and then they'll work again once everything cools off. All right, let me bring you in here and show you what we're working with. So you can see that this is just not a good setup, because vibration would have took those out and took those off. Not a good setup. There's a fuse block that was installed, mechanical relays, or not really relays. I don't know if these are called relays or fuses, but now one of the customers' complaints about how he tried to wire it himself, as soon as he would hook up the coil, he got no fire. If he tried to crank it, there was no fire to the coil, no fire out of the coil wires or spark plug wires. Another complaint was as soon as he'd hook the positive to the battery from the rectifier, it would spark. So he had something wired wrong and could not figure it out. So that's why it came here. I told him, hey, if it's mine, I'll just rewire the whole thing, start from scratch. And he said, well, let's do that. So that's why we're doing this now, because several things I suspect were wired incorrectly. And we don't want to fry anything in the system, and I hope that he didn't, but we'll soon see once we get everything undone and out of here. Okay, there's nothing connected to the negative. All right, he did want this as his starter button, so we're going to hide it. The way we're going to probably run this is a key switch on in the center console, push button start, and then we'll have a couple of others. We'll hide this, and I'll show you a good place to hide it. If you're ever looking for a good place to hide your starter switch, this main bracket right here that goes between the jugs is a good place to put a flush mount push button switch. You just reach under the tank and it's right there. The wires are up, hidden up under the tank, so they're not going to get hot and really hard to find unless you just know where it's at. Those are usually good places. Of course, you can hide them really anywhere, but I think that's where we're going to put this one. Now, he did run nice wire loom, very nice, so I will give him that. He tried, guys, he really did. So no knocking anybody for giving it their best. All right, so we're not going to need probably 90% of this. It's really going to be simple when we wire it. Yeah. Now at first I thought that these were turning lights turned backwards. But he said, no, these are LEDs to shine back on the motor. So he wants to keep those, so we will run a switch for those. So the first thing I like to do when I'm starting a whole new wiring system is start with the switch. This is where you're going to control all your main power. And so this is where I start. Straight up and down is usually your off position. So I think we found our hot. It's this post right here. This is a 5-post switch. So that is seems to be our hot. This seems to be our ignition, because when you switch it on, we have continuity. Then when we go to lights, we keep our ignition on. So that seems to be working there. Now let's find our lights, which would not work in the first position, but would work in this second position. Okay, we have power there. And when we switch it to the ignition, the lights turn off. When we switch it to off, we still have nothing. So this seems to be our power in from the battery. Nothing on ignition, and then that is our lights. Okay. We go over here to this one. We have ignition, and we keep ignition. Okay. So our setup on this switch comes in from the battery. It's here at the top left. Our lights is down here at the bottom, and right beside it is our ignition. Now you do have a clockwise switch is like for our auxiliary, but this is chopper wiring, so we're not switching it to that. So ignition, lights, power source in. Now, once we have this switch set up to where we know how it operates, we'll go ahead and install our battery. We'll hook the negative up. We'll run our positive, which will run through a fuse, and then run to our ignition switch. Okay, so we have a ground wire right here. A good thick, newish style cable. So since this is a hot wire, we start up here at the switch. That way when you come back here, you're not got anything hot flopping around. Again, we're not worried about the running of our wires. We're just trying to get a game plan right now. I like to work with the easiest first. Now we know our switch. Let's get our light running. What he's going to run, since he doesn't have a high beam, low beam switch, he's just going to run brights. So when he switches this on, it's going to be bright. When you're on a motorcycle, you need a bright light anyway. So when I chop a wire, I only chop a wire for a high beam and not a low beam, high beam switch. If you want to switch, we'll put one on. But chopper wiring is just the basics. One of these two wires is going to be your bright lights. One's going to be low beam, one's going to be high beam. That looks like the low beam, the white wire. And that looks like the high beam, the yellow wire. So our yellow wire is going to be our high beam. Okay, so that's our headlight. We will snip this. We will heat shrink it. Run it back in this harness, heat shrink over that as well. Almost everything is going to run off your ignition side. Power to your starter switch, power to the coil, power to the ignition, power to the rear brake running light is all going to be ran from this one. So that's all that we have left. Then we'll set the timing. And we'll check our rectifier and stator as well. Okay, so the more I scratched my head on it, the more I decided to run just one wire off the ignition. And he did have this nice fuse block. And it is a 6-terminal block. So I think I'm going to use it. It's nice. It'll fit down in this area right here real nice, tucked away. And that gives me six blocks to work with. So what I've done now, we know we got the front light working. Now let's get the rear lights working and the brake lights. So right now I've just got the ignition running here. off this wire into the block, the fuse block. So that fuse block feeds all 6 of these terminals. Of course, these 3 are dead because they don't have any fuses in them. These 2 are hot and this one's hot. So I ran a wire in that runs back to these. So the way he wants this set up, these lights are going to be his running lights. This is going to be his brake light. Because they're not dual lights, they're not like a dim and then a bright. So now when I turn the key on, we have running lights, which is the skeleton. Then when I hit the brake switch, we have brake lights. So that's how I wanted it set up. It's just running off that 1-pin terminal. And now we'll keep on wiring. Okay, so next order of business, we ran the rectifier cable or wire. It was run up through here, through this speedo cable hole, and then ran down and went to something, I don't know. So rectifier is very simple. You have your stator that feeds the rectifier. The rectifier throttles down that voltage, takes it back. It'll come up through here, up through the back of the tank. Then from there, it will go in to a 30 amp fuse. Well, a 30 amp relay, I should say. From that, it goes straight to your positive battery. So this feeds back to charge your battery while the bike and stator is turning. Rectifier converts it, sends it straight back up to the battery. This is just a safety in case something goes short in your stator or your rectifier. We have our lights wired. We have our positive wired to the ignition. We have our fuse block put in. We have our rectifier wired up. So now the only thing left is the starter and the ignition. All right, so the starter is very simple to hook up and set up. You have your main starter here, and then you have this solenoid relay kind of thing mixed in here together. I'm not sure what it's called, doodabber thing there. You'll have a main hot that runs to your battery. Thick cable is the best because that's going to send a lot of juice directly from the battery right into your starter. Then on this solenoid, you'll have a relay wire. It's usually green on most Harleys, and it's up here at the top. It just snaps in, clips in. So you'll need that green wire. Now the green wire is when you hit the power button to that green wire and send power to that green wire, then it connects that main feed wire from the battery to your starter, and your starter does the starter thing. So very simple to hook up. That main hot wire to your battery, and then the starter here, that green wire to your ignition. I'll show you how we've got our ignition set up on the other side. Now I do want to give you a word of caution. This main thick wire runs straight to your starter. You never want to hook this big thick wire straight from your starter up to the battery without some type of mechanical, I call them relays, but they're circuit breakers, I think is the official name. You want a big, good 50 amp, 60 amp circuit breaker in between your battery and your starter. The reason for that is that if your starter gets stuck running, this wire will melt almost instantly, and it will melt your entire system. All wires, your bike will almost burn down before you can get this wire off. It'll smoke, it'll melt, it'll blow your battery. So never run it straight from your starter right to your battery. Now for testing just a quick bump, I'm doing that. But do not leave it like this. Always put a circuit breaker, a big one, in between your starter wire and your battery. This wire runs down to that green wire I told you about on the relay. So anytime this wire gets a positive, it connects down at the starter, connects this wire to the starter, and the starter does the start stuff. So I'm just going to connect this here, and you can hear this crank over. Okay, so that's the starter engagement. So this is going to be where we push our starter button. So what I've done here, he wanted a hidden starter button, and so I've built a little bracket into this crossover brace for the jugs, and he's got a nice little chrome starter button there. On the back of this, it's just 2 terminals, and I did test this button to make sure it's good. And so I will run that wire that I just connected here to the battery. I'll run a wire here to one side. To the other side, I will feed a wire back through and hit this open terminal on our fuse block here. This is positive hot only when the key is on. So when the key is off, this is dead, and if you push this button, nothing would happen. With the key on, it feeds power out of here into this switch. You hold this button down, it connects to the other side, which connects to this wire right here. So pretty simple setup. I'll get it set up and then I'll show you the final result. So we have our 2 wires ran in the loom. It's going to come up. It comes out here. We have the 1 wire from the push button going into our fuse block. Remember, this doesn't turn hot until the key is on. The other wire going to the lead that goes down to the top of the starter solenoid. So now when we turn the, well, with the key off, nothing. Now with the key on and ignition, so the starter and all the wiring and the push start is now wired. Now the only thing left for wiring this bike is our ignition on our cam, and then hooking the coils up with that and cleaning all of our wire up so that it's nice and neat and out of the way. So on wiring up this Ultima ignition, it's going from points to digital. It's a real simple one, and this is the Ultima 53-49. It's a dual fire. And what that means is that the white wire, which is your trigger wire, and the blue wire, which is your positive wire, feed this coil, and this coil fires both plugs at the same time. Now on the instructions, you can see there's just 2 wires. There's a white wire, there's a blue wire, but then your blue wire goes to your ignition hot, your on and off switch. So when we turn this key up here to ignition, we will get power to this. Now also, when you're installing this, you'll see that it's got an important note. Be absolutely certain that the blue wire and the white wire are in the correct location. If somehow these 2 are reversed in location, the new ignition will be destroyed instantly upon powering up. So blue wire is 12 volts, white wire, your trigger wire, is to your coil. Now, some people freak out and say, well, on my coil, it doesn't have a positive and negative. I don't know which side is which. Well, what this is only talking about is that you make sure you hook your positive hot wire to your blue wire, and your white wire becomes your trigger. If you hook the positive wire to your white wire, you will fry this. So that's all that means. The mechanical advances are still in behind this plate. You'll want to make sure that they're good and working. They fly out and come back real easy. The springs are good. Put a little bit of oil. I mean, don't dunk it in oil, but put a little bit of oil back on those springs and advances. Make sure they fly in and out. And then what you'll do is put your button back on, and then just make sure it advances and comes back out. Now these are made for Evos and Sportsters. So you'll either start this at a 12 o'clock or a 3 o'clock. Well, these pins here, you have to start this at a 12 o'clock. So there's no chance in starting it at 3 o'clock, which is on some Sportster models. So it's pretty easy to install. So you'll get that set on there. You'll hook your wires up. I'll show you where your wires are hooked up. So here we have our white wire running to one side of the trigger, or one side of the coil. Here we have our blue wire coming up to the other side of the coil, and then this just goes to our fuse block, which is operated up here by this key. So if you have a coil that has this color, like a brass color or a copper color connector, and then on the other one, well, this one has both, but one will be like a bare metal color and one will be like a brass color. If it's a brass color, that's usually your positive side. If they're both the same color, like this coil, it doesn't matter. But you just want to make sure that your hot runs through the blue on this setup. I already checked spark, we're good there. I did advance it, and now we will just fire it up. Now, I did notice when I fired it up, you're going to hear a lot of racket. And the reason is this. A lot of slop in this, and it's actually grinding against this inner primary plate, and you can see the shavings there. So I didn't run it long, and you'll hear it in the video. It sounds terrible. So I've got to address this. I'm not sure. I think something wasn't spaced correctly, or there is a bushing that's missing. There should never be that much play in it. Well, let's crank it up. It's going to sound terrible, but at least we know that we've got the ignition maybe not dialed in statically where we want it, but at least it's running. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it. We have our basic set up for all of our wiring. Now what we'll do is just go back through, clean up all the wiring. Of course, we will put a fuse in. It runs from the ignition to the battery. Here's a little tip. Anything coming off the hot terminal needs to be fused, or a circuit breaker or a relay put on it. So never forget that. I'll put in this big circuit breaker for the starter wire that runs up. I will put in an inline fuse, probably up here underneath the cover, so it's easy to get out and swap out if anything goes wrong with the ignition. I will wire loom everything, clean everything up, but as you can see, it's going to be a lot cleaner once everything gets buttoned up and tightened up. So I thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'll get the rest of this done and knocked out. It's pretty Mickey Mouse stuff, but thank you so much. Coming up, I've got another Sportster. I don't know why I got so many Sportsters in this year, but I got another Sportster, and the guy bought it in a storage unit, didn't have a title, but he has a Sportster frame with a title. So if you've ever wanted to know how to totally disassemble a Sporty and put it back together, then the next video will be something you'll be interested in. Thank you so much for hanging out in the shop with me today, and tell your mom and them I said hi.